They say architecture is the art of making the invisible visible. You look at a vacant, muddy plot of land, and where someone else sees nothing, you see the steel skeletal frames, the load-bearing beams, the way the late afternoon sun will strike the floor-to-ceiling glass panes of a living room 20 years from now. I spent my entire life designing foundations. I knew how to calculate structural stress down to the millimeter, but I never learned how to calculate the stress of a human lie. I never realized that the people closest to me were digging a sinkhole right beneath the house I had built for myself. My name is Ryan. At 32, I was finally finding my footing. My father had passed away when I was 20, leaving behind a mountain of medical debt and a modest, slightly weathered suburban house in the Crestview neighborhood. For over a decade, it had been just me and my mother, Helen. I worked 3 jobs through college, passed my licensing exams, and slowly, agonizingly, paid off every single cent my father owed. My mother's hands were calloused from years of working retail shifts to help keep food on the table, and my ultimate goal in life was simple: give her the peace and comfort she had sacrificed her youth to provide for me. We weren't the only ones in the family tree, though. My father had an older brother, Victor. Uncle Victor was the success story of the extended family, a man who built a massive commercial real estate empire by cutting corners, underpaying contractors, and stepping on anyone smaller than him. To Victor, my father had been a weak-willed failure, and by extension, I was just the penniless nephew who chose a pretty art degree over real business. Whenever Victor graced our home with his presence, usually once a year at Christmas, driving his pristine, oversized Mercedes, he made sure to point out the peeling paint on our porch, or ask when I was going to get a real man's job, instead of drawing pictures on a computer. "You've got to think bigger, kid," Victor would sneer, swirling an expensive scotch he'd brought himself because our selection wasn't up to his standards. "You're building doghouses in the suburbs. My firm just broke ground on a 30-story plaza downtown. That's legacy. You're just surviving." I swallowed my pride every single time. I did it for my mother, who always smiled politely, refusing to let his arrogance ruin her holidays. Then came Fiona. When I met her at a local art gallery opening, she seemed like the missing piece of my blueprint. She was vibrant, ambitious, and loved the finer things in life, things I couldn't quite afford yet, but promised her I would build toward. We married after 2 years of dating. My mother gave us her blessing, and to make things easier, Fiona and I moved into the Crestview house, converting the spacious attic into my independent design studio. For the first year, it felt like a dream. But ambition can be a dangerous thing when it isn't anchored by contentment. As my independent architectural consulting business grew, it didn't grow fast enough for Fiona. She started dropping hints about moving out of Crestview. She began complaining about the boring, old-money neighbors, and specifically targeted our next-door neighbor, Garth. Garth was a bitter, retired petty bureaucrat who spent his days policing lawn heights and watching the neighborhood through his front window blinds. He envied anyone who made a name for themselves. Because my studio was doing well and clients were occasionally parking near his driveway, Garth made it his life's mission to file noise and zoning complaints against my home office. Fiona despised him, and she despised the house. "Look at Uncle Victor," Fiona said one evening, looking up from her phone as we ate a modest dinner. "He just bought a villa in Aspen. Ryan, you're twice as smart as he is. Why are we still living in your childhood home with Garth glaring at us every time we take out the trash?" "We're building capital, Fee," I told her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm bidding on 2 major commercial projects next month. If I land just one, we can put a down payment on a place overlooking the valley. We just need to be patient." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Patience doesn't pay the rent on a life worth living, Ryan." I should have listened to the tone of her voice. I should have seen the hairline fractures forming in the foundation. But I was too busy drawing the future to see the present collapsing right in front of me. The rain was coming down in sheets the night the world ended. We were driving back from a mandatory family dinner at Uncle Victor's sprawling estate. It had been an exhausting 3 hours of Victor bragging about his latest corporate acquisitions, while Fiona listened with rapt attention, laughing a little too loudly at his unoriginal jokes. I felt a headache pounding behind my eyes as I navigated the slick, winding roads of the Valley Highway. "You could have been a bit more enthusiastic when Victor offered to look over your commercial blueprints, Ryan," Fiona muttered, staring out the passenger window at the blurred streetlights. "Victor doesn't want to help me, Fiona. He wants to see if there's anything worth stealing," I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "He's a vulture. He's always been a vulture." "He's family," she snapped, turning sharply toward me. "And he's successful. Maybe if you weren't so paranoid." She never finished the sentence. Out of the blinding downpour, a delivery truck hydroplaned, blowing straight through a blinking red light at the intersection. I remember the deafening screech of tires, the blinding flash of high beams illuminating the interior of our car, and the instinctual, violent jerk of my arms as I threw the steering wheel to the left, taking the brunt of the impact on my side of the vehicle to protect her. Then came the sickening crunch of metal, the explosive deployment of airbags, and a white-hot flash of pain before everything went completely black. When I regained consciousness, the smell of burning rubber and chemical powder filled the air. My head was throbbing, and blood was trickling down my temple, but my first thought was her. "Fiona?" I croaked, turning my head. She was slumped against the passenger door, pale and unresponsive, a deep gash near her hairline. The next few hours were a chaotic blur of flashing red and blue lights, the metallic scream of the jaws of life, the sterile, biting smell of an ambulance interior, and finally, the bright, merciless fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Hospital emergency room. By some miracle, my injuries were superficial, a mild concussion, a sprained wrist, and a few stitches along my hairline. But Fiona wasn't as lucky. She was rushed into emergency surgery to repair internal bleeding. I sat in the sterile, cavernous waiting room at 3 a.m., my clothes stained with dried blood and highway grime, my mind spinning into a dark abyss of anxiety. My mother, Helen, was on her way, but she was an hour away using public transit since I had the only car. Needing to update Fiona's parents, who lived 3 states away, I realized my own phone had been smashed to pieces in the crash. I looked down at the plastic bag of personal effects the nurse had handed me. Inside was Fiona's iPad, miraculously intact within its heavy-duty travel case. I unlocked it using our shared passcode. I opened her email to find her mother's contact info, but as I did, a push notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was from an encrypted messaging application called Signal, an app I didn't even know she had on her device. The message read, "Are you okay? I saw the traffic report near the valley. Tell me you weren't in that wreck. I need you." The sender's name was just a single letter, V. My heart did a strange, violent flutter. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a friend from college, a colleague, anyone. But the instinct of a man who measures things for a living told me that something was fundamentally misaligned. My fingers trembled as I tapped the notification. The chat history opened, and with every swipe of my thumb, the world around me grew violently cold. The messages went back more than 14 months. It wasn't just an emotional affair. It was an active, burning betrayal. There were photos, intimate, candid photographs of my wife taken in luxury hotel rooms, on private boats, and inside a penthouse apartment I recognized instantly. It was Uncle Victor's downtown penthouse. "Ryan is working late in the studio tonight," one message from Fiona read, dated 3 months prior. "He thinks I'm out with the girls. Can you pick me up at the corner of 5th? Victor's reply. "Always beautiful. Let the boy draw his little lines. I'll show you what real power feels like." But the knife didn't just twist in my marriage. It twisted into my very livelihood. As I scrolled further, I found PDF attachments. They were high-resolution screenshots and file exports of my proprietary architectural designs, the exact blueprints for the 2 major commercial projects I'd been bidding on. "Here are Ryan's concept layouts for the new tech hub downtown," Fiona had written to Victor. "He's undercutting your firm's pricing by 15%. Modify your bid using his spatial optimization ideas. He doesn't stand a chance." Victor's response was chilling. "Good girl. My firm just locked in the presentation date. By the time the city board sees our proposal, your husband's little business will be dead in the water. I'll make sure to buy you that diamond bracelet you wanted as a bonus." I sat there in the plastic hospital chair, the automated blood pressure cuff on my arm suddenly feeling like a tourniquet, cutting off my life support. My breathing grew shallow. The woman undergoing life-saving surgery just 50 yards away, the woman I had just risked my life to shield from an oncoming truck, had been systematically dismantling my career, sleeping with my billionaire uncle, and mocking my existence behind my back. "Ryan? Oh, my sweet boy." I looked up. My mother had just rushed through the sliding doors, her coat damp from the rain, her eyes wide with terror. She threw her arms around me, weeping, thanking God that I was alive. I held her tightly with my one uninjured arm. Over her shoulder, I stared at the glowing iPad screen. The sheer volume of anger that surged through my veins should have made me scream, should have made me smash the tablet against the linoleum floor. But instead, a strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The architect in me took over. The foundation was completely rotten. It couldn't be repaired. It had to be demolished. Completely, utterly, and systematically. "I'm okay, Mom," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow, flat, and completely steady. "I'm right here, and I know exactly what we need to do." I spent the next 4 months playing the role of the doting, oblivious husband. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. When Fiona came home from the hospital, walking with a cane and complaining about her aches, I cooked her meals, fluffed her pillows, and listened to her complain about how stressful life had become. Every time she looked at me with those deceptive eyes, every time Uncle Victor called to check up on his favorite nephew with a patronizing chuckle, I felt a sick heat in my throat. But I never let the mask slip. Instead, I worked in the shadows. I contacted my childhood best friend, Liam. Liam was an IT specialist and a fiercely loyal guy who had known my father. When I showed Liam the data logs from the iPad, his jaw hit the floor. "This is corporate espionage, Ryan," Liam said, his eyes glued to the monitor in his apartment. "They didn't just break your heart. They stole your intellectual property to win a multi-million-dollar municipal bid. We can't just get a divorce lawyer. We need to ruin them." Together, we monitored their communications. Because Fiona thought she was entirely safe, she didn't realize Liam had set up a secure mirror of her cloud backups. We waited for the perfect moment. That moment arrived in late spring. Fiona's physical therapy was finished, and she announced she needed a solo mental health retreat to clear her mind after the trauma of the accident. "My therapist thinks a weekend alone in nature would be deeply healing for my PTSD, Ryan," she said, packing a designer suitcase filled with clothes that were entirely too glamorous for a solitary hike. "I booked a small cabin up at Sapphire Lake. No cell service, no distractions. Just me and my thoughts." "Of course, honey," I said, kissing her cheek. "You deserve it. Take all the time you need." The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, Liam and I were in his truck. We didn't need a GPS. We had her actual reservation details from her digital history. She wasn't staying at a public campground. She was staying at the Sapphire Lake Executive Resort, specifically in Uncle Victor's private, restricted-access lakeside luxury cabin. We arrived at the resort on a crisp Saturday evening. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long, bloody shadows across the crystal-clear water. Liam stayed in the truck with his laptop, monitoring the local security frequencies, while I walked into the main lodge. Thanks to an ironclad file of evidence and a letter from a high-profile corporate litigation attorney I had hired, using the last of my savings, the resort manager's face went completely pale when I explained the situation. The resort didn't want a massive public scandal involving illicit activities on their property by a prominent real estate mogul. The manager quietly handed me a master key card to Cabin 14. I walked down the winding wooden boardwalk, the sound of my boots echoing in the quiet twilight. I reached the door of Cabin 14. Through the large glass windows, I could see a beautifully set dinner table, lit by expensive candles. Soft jazz music drifted through the air. There was a bucket of vintage champagne on ice, and sitting on the plush leather sofa were Uncle Victor and my wife, Fiona. They were clinking glasses, laughing, completely insulated by their wealth and arrogance. I swiped the keycard. The lock clicked, and the heavy oak door swung open. The jazz music seemed to stop instantly. Fiona jumped to her feet, her glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the hardwood floor, spilling dark red wine across the rug. Victor froze, a smirk halfway formed on his face before it decayed into sheer panic. "Ryan!" Fiona gasped, her face turning a ghostly shade of white. What are you doing here? How did you—" "Nice cabin, Victor," I said smoothly, stepping inside and closing the door firmly behind me. I pulled a thick manila envelope from inside my jacket. "The spatial layout is incredible. Did you steal the design for this place too, or did you actually pay a real architect?" Victor recovered quickly, puffing out his chest, stepping in front of Fiona. "Look, kid, I don't know what kind of psychotic break you're having, but you need to get the hell out of my property before I have the guards throw you in jail." "You won't be calling any guards, Uncle," I said, tossing the envelope onto the dinner table right next to the caviar. Victor frowned, reaching out with a trembling hand to open it. Fiona peered over his shoulder. Inside were 80 pages of printed Signal chat logs, bank statements showing transfers from Victor's offshore consulting shell company to a private account in Fiona's maiden name, and a legally certified forensic analysis proving that my proprietary design files had been transferred directly to Victor's corporate servers. "That's a copy of a formal divorce petition on the grounds of adultery and fraud," I told Fiona, looking her dead in the eye. And right beneath it, Victor, is a federal cease and desist order alongside a copy of a lawsuit filed 2 hours ago with the State Licensing Board and the Municipal Ethics Committee for corporate theft and bid rigging. Fiona fell back onto the sofa, covering her mouth as sob escaped her throat. Ryan, please. It's not what it looks like. I was confused. Save it, Fiona, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her tears like a diamond blade through glass. You told Victor I only knew how to draw lines. You forgot that lines are what keep a structure from collapsing. I've traced every single line of your betrayal. You're done. Victor's face turned a violent, dark shade of purple. You think this scares me? I have a legal team that will tie you up in court until you're bankrupt, boy. You have nothing. I have the media contacts of the 2 city council members your firm outbid using my designs, Victor, I replied calmly. They're already reviewing the files. By Monday morning, your multi-million-dollar downtown plaza project will be frozen under federal investigation. Your investors will pull out by Tuesday. Enjoy your weekend. I turned on my heel and walked out into the cool night air, leaving the sounds of their frantic, vicious arguments echoing across the silent waters of Sapphire Lake. The demolition was successful, but when you blow up a structure, the debris has to land somewhere. When we returned to the city, Fiona didn't even bother coming back to the Crestview house to pack her things. She sent a moving truck accompanied by a low-rent lawyer, but Uncle Victor wasn't going down without a fight. He knew he couldn't beat the physical evidence in a straight legal battle, so he decided to wage a war of attrition. He wanted to destroy my reputation before the court dates even arrived, and he found the perfect weapon right next door. Garth, our envious neighbor, was easily bought. Victor approached Garth, offering to fund a massive neighborhood improvement grant through one of his dummy charities if Garth helped clean up the neighborhood's moral character. Within a week, a vicious, coordinated smear campaign began. Garth started whispering to the local homeowners association, posting on community forums, and cornering neighbors at their mailboxes. The narrative they spun was completely inverted. They claimed that I was a violent, abusive husband whose temper had caused the car accident 4 months ago. They claimed that Fiona had fled to a resort out of fear for her life, and that my failing business had driven me to financial madness, causing me to fabricate a corporate lawsuit against my own generous uncle to extort money. Suddenly, the neighborhood I had lived in since childhood turned into a hostile gauntlet. People I had known for 15 years started looking away when I walked down the driveway. I found trash thrown onto our front lawn. Garth even went so far as to install 3 high-powered security cameras on his roof, all pointed directly into my attic studio windows, claiming he needed to monitor a potential threat to the community. One afternoon, I walked out to find my mother, Helen, crying on the front porch. She was holding a letter from the neighborhood association, a formal notice warning us that my home business was violating local residential codes and that we were facing daily fines if we didn't shut down the studio. Ryan, maybe we should just leave, my mother wept, her shoulders shaking. Your father's memory is in this house, but these people, they're looking at us like we're monsters. Victor's money is too powerful. We can't fight them all. I knelt in front of her, taking her worn hands in mine. Mom, look at me. A lie is like a poorly mixed batch of concrete. It looks solid for a few weeks, but the moment you put real weight on it, it cracks. Let them talk. Let Garth watch us. We are going to keep our heads down. We are going to do our work, and we are going to let the truth do its job. I refused to engage. When Garth stood at the property line, glaring at me with his arms crossed, trying to provoke a fight, I simply smiled and nodded. When the association sent fines, my lawyer filed immediate stays based on the pending federal litigation against Victor. Instead of fighting the neighborhood, I threw every single ounce of my remaining energy into my craft. I partnered with Liam, who helped me secure a highly protected cloud server, and I began working on a massive, confidential project. The state government had announced an open, blind-judged architectural competition to design a new historical city landmark, a massive cultural and civic center downtown. The selection committee consisted of independent, out-of-state architects who couldn't be bought by local real estate tycoons like Victor. For 18 hours a day, while Garth watched through his cameras and the neighborhood whispered, I sat in my dark attic studio, pouring my soul into the blueprints. I designed a structure that was bold, sustainable, and utterly unbreakable. I poured my father's struggle, my mother's sacrifice, and my own survival into every pillar, every archway, and every structural calculation. I submitted the design under a strict pseudonym, the Phoenix Group. 2 years passed. 2 years of silence, isolation, and unrelenting grind. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Just as I had predicted, Uncle Victor's empire couldn't withstand the weight of his own corruption. Once the Municipal Ethics Committee opened the investigation into his bid rigging, his other shady dealings began to unravel like a loose thread on a cheap sweater. Investors panicked and pulled their funding. His bank accounts were frozen. To avoid federal jail time, Victor was forced to settle out of court, paying a massive multi-million-dollar fine that effectively liquidated his commercial real estate firm. With his fortune gone, his relationship with Fiona turned radioactive. They hadn't built a life together. They had built a conspiracy. When there was no more money to buy diamond bracelets or luxury trips to Aspen, the toxicity turned inward. Fiona filed for a bitter divorce from Victor, trying to claw away whatever assets he had left, leaving both of them broke, miserable, and utterly isolated in a web of ongoing lawsuits. And then, the blind judgment for the city landmark competition was announced. I will never forget the morning the official courier arrived at the Crestview house. My mother and I stood in the kitchen as I broke the wax seal on the heavy parchment envelope from the State Department of Infrastructure. "Dear Project Lead of the Phoenix Group," the letter read, "it is our distinct honor to inform you that your design has been selected as the grand prize winner for the City Civic Landmark Project. Your architectural plan was voted unanimously by the International Board as a masterpiece of modern civic engineering. A state grant of $3 million has been allocated for your firm to oversee the construction, effective immediately." My mother let out a loud sob, throwing her arms around my neck. Liam, who had rushed over the moment I called him, let out a wild shout of victory, lifting both of us off the floor. We had done it. We hadn't just survived, we had conquered. The news hit the local papers the next morning. "Local scapegoat designer wins landmark contract while disgraced tycoon, uncle faces ruin." The shift in the Crestview neighborhood was instantaneous and nauseating. The very neighbors who had thrown trash on my lawn suddenly started waving at me. The Homeowners Association sent a massive basket of muffins with a handwritten apology note, claiming there had been a terrible misunderstanding regarding zoning policies. Garth suddenly stopped standing on his porch, his high-powered security cameras mysteriously disappearing from his roof within hours of the newspaper publication. But I didn't want their apologies. I wanted to celebrate with the only people who had actually stood by me when the foundation was shaking. To celebrate the promotion and the launch of my new firm, I decided to host a grand backyard party at our Crestview home. I didn't invite the fake neighbors or the local socialites. I invited the construction crews who were going to build my landmark, my legal team, Liam, and my mother's close friends from her old retail days. The evening of the party was beautiful. The backyard was decorated with warm, glowing string lights. A local catering team had set up a beautiful spread of food and a custom drink station featuring a massive crystal punch bowl filled with a signature citrus champagne toast. But as the laughter echoed through the yard, I noticed a dark shadow moving near the perimeter of our property line. Through the dense hedges separating my yard from Garth's house, I saw a figure huddled in the dark. It wasn't just Garth. Standing next to him, wearing a faded, rumpled suit that looked 3 sizes too big for his deflated frame, was Uncle Victor. Victor looked broken. His hair was graying, his posture slumped, his eyes wild and bloodshot with a terrifying, venomous envy. He was staring at the glowing string lights, staring at the catering staff, staring at the nephew he had tried to crush now standing at the pinnacle of success. I tapped Liam on the shoulder, pointing subtly through the trees. "Look who decided to show up." Liam's eyes narrowed. "What are those 2 creeps doing? Victor shouldn't even be within a mile of this place." "Let's just keep an eye on them," I said, a faint warning bell ringing in my mind. "Don't make a scene yet." Liam nodded, but instead of just watching, he pulled out his phone. Liam had helped me install a state-of-the-art, hidden 4K security camera system around the perimeter of our house a year ago to protect my studio from Garth's harassment. He opened the live night vision feed on his screen, zooming in directly on the dark gap in the hedges. What we saw on that screen made our blood run cold. Victor was handing a thick white paper envelope to Garth. It looked like a few $100s in crumpled cash. In exchange, Garth reached into his pocket and handed Victor a small amber glass vial filled with a cloudy, thick liquid. It was a concentrated commercial pesticide contaminant, a toxic chemical Garth used for his illegal, industrial-grade weed-killing hobby. We watched in real time as Victor, fueled by pure, unadulterated malice, waited for the catering staff to step away from the drink station to bring out a fresh tray of food. With his hood pulled up, Victor slipped through the gap in the bushes, dodging the shadows, and approached the back of the drink table. With a trembling hand, Victor unscrewed the amber vial and poured the entire contents of the chemical contaminant directly into the large crystal punch bowl meant for the grand celebratory toast. He thought he was completely invisible. He thought he was finally going to humiliate me, to make my guests violently ill, to ruin my reputation on the biggest night of my life, and to frame me as an incompetent host who poisoned his own business partners. Victor slipped back into the bushes, joining Garth, both of them waiting with wicked, expectant grins to watch the horror unfold. Liam looked up from his phone, his face pale with a mix of shock and absolute rage. "Ryan, that bastard just spiked the punch. I'm calling the cops right now. This is attempted murder." "Wait," I said, grabbing Liam's forearm. I looked at the crystal bowl across the yard, then back at the security feed showing Victor and Garth hiding in the dark, snickering like schoolboys. A cold, surgical precision settled over me. "Don't call them yet. Give me 2 minutes." I walked casually across the yard, smiling at my guests, weaving through the crowd until I reached the catering station. The head caterer was just about to pick up the silver ladle to begin pouring the celebratory toast into 50 crystal champagne flutes. "Hold on a second, Marcus," I said quietly to the caterer, placing a hand on his arm. "We're going to change the order of the program slightly. Can you do me a favor? Fill 2 large premium glasses directly from that bowl right now and bring them to me. Don't pour anything else for anyone else yet." The caterer looked confused but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Vance." He ladled the clear, slightly cloudy liquid into 2 elegant glasses. I took them both. I turned around and walked toward the edge of the property, right toward the dark gap in the hedges where Victor and Garth were crouching. "You know, Uncle Victor," I called out into the darkness, my voice cutting through the soft ambient music of the party. "It's incredibly rude to stand in the bushes when there's a celebration happening right here." The bushes rustled violently. Victor and Garth both froze, realized they had been spotted. Victor tried to sneer, stepping out into the ambient glow of the string lights, his eyes fixing instantly on the 2 glasses in my hands. "I don't need an invitation from an arrogant little punk like you, Ryan," Victor spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hatred. "You think you're a big man now? You think you've won?" "I don't think I've won, Victor. I know I have," I said, stepping right up to the property line. I held out one of the glasses toward him. "But despite everything you did, stealing my designs, sleeping with my wife, trying to bankrupt my mother, I still believe in family. I saw you out here looking hungry. I thought it would be a shame if we didn't share a drink to celebrate the new landmark contract. After all, your corporate collapse is the only reason the city board looked at my bid in the first place." Garth looked at the glass, then at Victor, his eyes wide with panic. He knew exactly what was in that cup, but Victor was blinded by his own pride and a desperate need to show he wasn't afraid of me. He looked at the drink, thinking that if he drank it and pretended to be fine, or if he accepted it, he could somehow salvage his dignity, or mock me further. He didn't think I knew. He truly believed his midnight sabotage was completely secret. "You think a little glass of cheap champagne makes us even, boy?" Victor mocked, snatching the glass from my hand with a bitter laugh. "I've built towers higher than you can ever climb. I'll take your drink, and I'll tell you right to your face. You're still nothing but a servant drawing lines for real men." Victor raised the glass to his lips, staring at me with pure defiance, and took a massive, deep gulp of the contaminated liquid. The reaction was almost instantaneous. The concentrated pesticide hit his throat like liquid fire. Victor's eyes dilated to the size of coins. He let out a choked, horrific gasp, dropping the crystal glass, which shattered against his own boots. He fell to his knees on the grass, clutching his stomach, his face turning a deep, terrifying shade of crimson as he began to violently gag and vomit right onto the dirt. "Victor! Oh my God, Victor!" Garth shrieked, backing away in terror, realizing the entire plan had backfired horribly. "Liam! Now!" I shouted across the yard. Before Garth could even run toward his driveway, Liam and 3 off-duty police officers who were attending the party as guests tackled Garth directly to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. The rest of the party guests rushed over, gasping in horror as Uncle Victor writhed on the grass, clutching his throat, weeping and convulsing from the toxic chemical he had intended for me. The flashing red and blue lights returned to Crestview that night, but this time They weren't for me or a broken car. An ambulance rushed a semi-conscious, violently ill Uncle Victor to St. Jude's Hospital, the very hospital where I had discovered his betrayal 2 years ago. The police seized the crystal punch bowl as primary evidence, along with the hidden 4K security footage Liam handed over on a flash drive. Faced with a mountain of undeniable high-definition video evidence, an attempted murder charge, and an airtight corporate conspiracy file, Garth completely cracked under interrogation within 2 hours. He confessed to everything, admitting that Victor had paid him thousands of dollars over 2 years to harass my family, sabotage my business, and finally, providing the pesticide to poison my celebratory drink. Both of them were processed into the county jail, facing multiple felony counts of conspiracy, assault with a deadly substance, and criminal property damage. Victor's final act of desperation had guaranteed him a prison sentence from which his remaining assets could never buy him out. 3 days later, the morning sun was shining brightly through the newly painted front porch of the Crestview house. The air felt clean, crisp, and entirely free of the toxic fog that had hung over our lives for years. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing the final structural permits for the City Landmark project, while my mother poured fresh coffee. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing on the porch were 3 people. In the front was Fiona. She looked utterly unrecognizable from the glamorous, confident woman I had married. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face hollow and pale, her eyes rimmed with red from days of crying. Flanking her were Uncle Victor's immediate family members, his wife and adult son, looking entirely broken, their heads bowed. "Ryan," Fiona whispered, her voice cracking as a tear ran down her cheek. "Please, you have to listen to us. We have nowhere else to go." I didn't step outside. I stood firmly in the doorway, my hands resting on the frame. "What are you doing here, Fiona?" "Victor is in jail, Ryan." His son stepped forward, his voice desperate, pleading. "The judge set the bail at $500,000, and all our family assets are frozen under the corporate fraud liquidation. The banks are foreclosing on my mother's house next week. We're going to be completely homeless." "Ryan, please," Fiona begged, reaching out a trembling hand toward me, though she didn't dare cross the threshold. "I know I made mistakes, I know I hurt you, but we were married, we were family. You just won a $3 million state contract. If you just loan us the money to pay Victor's bail and stop the foreclosure, we can pay you back. We'll do whatever you want. Please don't let your own family starve in the street." My mother, Helen, walked up behind me. She didn't say a word. She simply placed a gentle, solid hand on my shoulder, standing beside her son. I looked at Fiona. I looked at the woman who had shared my bed while plotting to steal my future. I looked at Victor's family, who had laughed at my father's funeral and mocked our poverty for over a decade. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a desire to mock them or gloat over their misery. I felt absolutely nothing. They were just ghosts standing on a porch. "When I was 20, my father died," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the morning silence of the neighborhood. "He left us with nothing but debt and a leaking roof. We didn't have $500,000. We didn't even have $500 for groceries. I called Uncle Victor from this exact porch, begging him for a small loan so my mother wouldn't lose her home." Fiona swallowed hard, her face falling. "Do you know what Victor told me?" I continued, looking her dead in the eye. "He told me that a house built on a weak foundation deserves to collapse. He told me that survival is a test of real men, and that failures shouldn't be bailed out by the successful." "Ryan, that was Victor, not us," his son cried out. "No," I replied firmly. "It was all of you. You watched him do it. You enjoyed the fruits of his theft, and Fiona, you actively helped him try to bury me. You didn't care about the foundation of this family when you were digging the sinkhole. You only care now because you're the ones falling into it." "Ryan, please," Fiona sobbed, dropping to her knees on the wooden porch steps. "Have mercy. We're human beings." "I do have mercy," I said softly. "I'm not going to countersue you for the remaining marital assets, Fiona. You can keep whatever scraps your lawyers managed to save from Victor's ruins. But as an architect, I've learned one fundamental law of nature. You cannot build a strong structure using contaminated materials." I looked out at the beautiful, sunlit Crestview neighborhood, then back at the broken group on my steps. "The blueprint for this family has been redrawn, and none of you are in it." With a calm, steady hand, I pulled the heavy oak door shut. I turned the deadbolt, the clean metallic click echoing through the quiet house. I turned back to my kitchen table, picked up my architectural pen, and went back to building the future.